Welcome back to Rich Words Music, where today we're looking at this. It's the ENGL Ironball Special Edition, and this is a lunchbox-sized, made in Germany, all-tube amplifier. It features 2 channels and a bunch of built-in effects, MIDI connectivity, IR loaders, and loads more. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to take a look at it in the typical Rich Words Music style, and we're going to answer 3 basic questions about the amp. Number 1, is it suitable for players who don't just play metal? Because as you guys will know, ENGL is absolutely famous for being the #1 amp for metal players. However, I'm not much of a metal player. I've never owned an ENGL amp before, and I've dabbled in down-tuned stuff and lots of distortion, but I generally play indie and folk rock and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do today is see if I can get this amp to sound good for me in those genres as well as metal, and see if we can move this amplifier outside of the ENGL metal pigeonhole. The second question that we're going to answer is, are all these extra features included in this amplifier necessary? Are they cool to have, or are they just a gimmick? And the third question that we're going to answer is the ENGL Ironball Special Edition the ultimate home recording head for guitar players in 2021 and beyond? So that's what we're going to do. Now, what I'm going to do first is take you through the features on the front and the back of the amplifier, and afterwards I think we're going to play it in a bunch of different styles. So if you move in with me now, we'll take a look at the front panel. Okay, so this is the front panel of the amp then, and we'll go across from left to right. This is the input where you plug your guitar's lead in. This is the clean gain control that controls the amount of gain and saturation you have when you're on the clean channel. Now, the clean channel doesn't have its own master volume control. There is an overall master for the amplifier, but with the clean, you literally just have a gain control. You also have a lead gain control that controls the amount of gain on the lead channel, but the lead channel also has its own volume control. Here we have a bass, middle, and treble, so 3 band EQ, and those are shared by the 2 channels on the amp, so clean and lead share this one EQ here. The lead channel also has a presence control that controls the upper frequencies in the lead channel tone, and as I said, the lead channel has its own volume control. Now, the master volume control controls the overall level of the amplifier, so what ENGL recommend you do is you get your master set to how you want it and your clean set to where you want it to be. You can then use the lead volume control to balance out the 2 channels so they're at similar volume levels, or the lead is a bit louder than the clean. And here we have 8 switches that give you extra control over the amp's other features. These are also all things that can be controlled via MIDI. So let's go through the 2 rows then. Here we have store, and you hold this down for a couple of seconds to store the current settings that you have and want to store over MIDI. Next to that we have MVB, which is a master volume boost and gives you a couple of decibels of clean extra boost, say for a solo or something like that. Next to that we have a reverb. There is a built-in reverb on the Ironball Special Edition. It's kind of like a cross between a room and a small hall for me, and you turn that on and off with this switch. You can also hold this switch down for 2 seconds to activate or deactivate reverb tails. Next to reverb is the delay, and that also has a tails option. Now, the delay for me is kind of like an analog delay. It's a fully featured delay, so it has time, mix, and feedback controls, which are accessed on the back of the amp. You turn it on and off using this switch or using your MIDI controller, and the LED here actually flashes at the speed of the delay repeats, so that's a pretty cool little feature there. On the bottom row we have a gain boost control. Both the channels can have a gain boost applied. You switch between the clean and the lead channels with this switch. With this switch here, you can bring the effects loop in or out of your signal chain if you want it. And here we have a noise gate, which is only applicable to the lead channel, so the noise gate doesn't work on the clean channel. Here we have our standby switch, and here's our power switch. Moving over to the back of the amplifier then, and as you can see, there's a bunch more knobs, buttons, and controls to take into consideration. So here we have the delay mix, the delay time, and the delay feedback controls for the delay effect. Here we have the reverb control. You can have less reverb or more reverb, so a 1 knob reverb. Here we have the noise gate control, and that dictates how sensitive the noise gate is and how quickly and how thoroughly it kicks in to cut out unwanted extraneous noise. And here we have a button that is to do with the IR balanced output. When it's out, you're only using the preamp of the amplifier. Push it in, and you also activate the power amp when you're using IRs as well, and that activates the master control, and that's the setting that I'm using throughout this video. Over here we have the power soak control, the attenuation. You have this chicken head selector all the way up for 20 watts of power, 5 watts, 1 watt, and flick it down to use speaker off mode, as I've been using for the duration of this video. Here's where you plug your amp into the power. This is a foot switch in, where you can operate a single or double button foot switch to switch between the clean and lead channels, or give you your gain boost or not. Here we have a MIDI in for putting your MIDI controller in. It's got phantom power if you need it. And here we have a USB, which is to do with loading your own external IRs into the amplifier. This is the amp's effects loop if you wish to use that. And here we come to the IR section of the amplifier. Now you'll need to plug in via XLR if you're going to be using amplifier IR options, if you're going to be going straight into a PA system, or if you're going to be going into your DAW, your audio interface. There's a ground lift button if you need it for the XLR input. And here we have the IR selector option. Now the amp ships with 3 ENGL IRs in it, which occupy spaces 1 to 3, and spaces 4 to 8 are empty for you to put your own IRs in. And you do that by using the included USB cable, plugging it into your computer, and simply dragging and dropping your own IRs. The 3 ENGL IRs that ship with the amplifier are as follows. Number 1 is the ENGL E 2x12 VHB Vintage 30 cabinet. Number 2 is the ENGL E 4x12 VSB Vintage V30 cabinet. And the number 3, which is the one I'm using for most of the riffs, is the ENGL E 4x12 XXL V30 cabinet. So those are the IR options. If you're plugging in with headphones, you do that also on the back panel. It's a mini jack output on the amp here, and you have a level control there. And finally, over in the bottom right hand corner, we have the power amp output, and this is where you connect the amplifier to speakers if you're going to be doing that. You can either connect 1 8 to 16 ohm cabs or 2 16 ohm cabs. So that's the front and the back of the Ironball Special Edition. An awful lot for us to wrap our heads around there. So think of the amp on the front as being your gigging solution, and think of the back panel as being the recording solution. So everything you would need for a gig is there on the front for you. Everything you'd need for home recording is there on the back. And now what we're going to do is play the amplifier. So I'm only going to use the IR loader for this. I'm only going to use the built-in ENGL IRs, just so we know what this sounds like straight out of the box. I'm going to play a bunch of riffs in my favorite kind of genres and styles. So we're going to start on the amp's clean channel. We'll play some folk and some indie and some poppy stuff. I'll dial the clean channel's gain up a little bit. We'll do some indie and some classic rock, and then we'll flick over to the lead channel where the hard rock, the punk rock, the alternative rock, and yes, the metal lives. We'll get into those sounds. We'll hear how they work for me on my Fender Telecaster with its single coil pickups, and with my Epiphone Les Paul with the humbuckers. After we're done with the playing of the riffs, I will do a few different loops where we tweak the knobs and we can hear the true extremities to which you can go with the Ironball Special Edition. But enough talking, let's play it now, and we'll speak in more detail about it afterwards. Okay then, so that was a rather exhaustive tonal journey through the ups and downs of the ENGL Ironball Special Edition amplifier, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the riffs, the tones, the features, and some of the sounds. Maybe this video's opened you up to ENGL as a non-metal amplifier, or maybe you're a metal fan and you enjoyed the metal tones and nothing else, and if so, I'm glad that the video helped you as well. But I've had the Ironball Special Edition for a few weeks now, and it's really taken me some time to really get to know the ins and outs of it, because it's very different to any other amp that I've ever had. For the last few years I've been using a Hughes & Kettner Black Spirit 200, which is a similarly fully featured head. There's no tubes in that one as there are in the ENGL, but it does similar sorts of stuff, but it's voiced very differently and the features and usage options are different too. So the ENGL Ironball Special Edition has taken me some time to kind of get to grips with. But one thing that I wanted to say straight from the off is that I realized that in terms of the build quality of this amplifier, it's absolutely fantastic. It came out of the box and it is built like an absolute tank. It's made here in Germany, so it's 1,200 euros. We're not talking about a cheap amplifier, although for made in Germany that's very, very reasonable indeed, and it's super solid metal. Because it's a tube amp, I wouldn't want to be just throwing it in and out of a gigging van, but it feels as solid as a tube amp can be. I really like the recessed handle that kind of smoothly comes up or down, however you want to have it. Really, really nice, expensive feeling feature, and the rest of it all feels good. The knobs and the controls, they all feel like this thing has been built to withstand the rigors of life on the road. Very, very good indeed in terms of the build quality. And the next thing I want to talk about in a bit more detail is the sounds of the amplifier, because as I said in the intro, I've never owned an ENGL amp before. I didn't really realize that they were suitable for non-metal genres of music either. I just assumed they were for people who did down-tuned stuff, played baritones, etc, etc. Now, I've found that the Ironball Special Edition can actually go from really, really clean all the way up to that mean metal stuff. It does feel to me like an amplifier that wants to always go a little bit more than I'm pushing it, if you know what I mean. So when I've had the telly in playing really, really clean stuff with the clean gain down at about 9 o'clock, and the same with the Les Paul actually, with the hotter humbuckers, it feels nice and it's a nice classic tonality. It's not the most characterful clean tone in the world, it's a bit chimey and shimmery, but if you really want classic cleans like that, you're not going to buy an ENGL. I think you're probably going to go for something more in the Fender vein. But yeah, the clean channel is very, very usable on this amp, and it has a large range of options as well. It starts to break up quite early, especially if you're using hotter humbuckers like I have in my Les Paul, and that went all the way up to pretty heavy classic rock sounds on the clean channel. But with the Telecaster it started to break up at about 12 o'clock on the clean gain control, and I got some really nice tones out of it. For the country stuff that I did, country tones, they like to be clean, but they like to have a little bit of a snarl to them. So I set the clean gain to about 11 o'clock, and that just sort of broke up just a tiny little bit. It sounded fat to my ears, it really thickened up the sound. It worked really, really well. And I don't think anyone has probably ever played country on an ENGL Ironball before, because maybe that's not what they're for, I don't know. But I wanted to see if it could be done, and it could be done, and it worked very well. When it came to the poppy and the indie stuff on the clean channels, I thought it was absolutely fine. As I said, I don't think you have a massive amount of character with the cleans on this amp, and especially when you engage the humbuckers, it kind of feels like it's a clean channel which is there because they want you to have a clean channel there, but it feels like there's nothing wrong with it at all, and yet you know that the main course is going to be that lead channel. At least that's the way it came across to me. I like the cleans very much indeed, but if I literally just wanted an amplifier that would do clean, I'd probably go to a different choice. Now, when it comes to the lead channel, we're in totally different territory, and that straight away upped the game, upped the amount of aggression immediately, especially with the humbuckers. Now, when I went onto the humbucking mode with the Les Paul and had the lead gain knob almost all the way down, it was still too much for me to do my AC/DC influenced classic rock stuff. It just had too much of an aggressive mid-range sort of a push. It was too much for me, so I had to do that on the clean channel. Now, when it came to the Telecaster with the lead gain control down much lower, it was quite a nice classic rock sort of a sound, but still a little bit more aggressive than I personally would use it. And I think again, the Ironball was just telling me, come on, turn the gain up, we want to go a bit more, we want to rock a bit more. And so that's what I did. And so for the heavier genres of music, you can totally hear that the Ironball is at home doing absolutely all of that. When I did the punk rock stuff, it did that very well indeed. It does palm muting very nicely. It's nice and tight. When I did the alternative rock stuff as well, it's a nice, thick, rich, modern sounding distortion. And by the time we got through to the metal, it was absolutely fantastic, particularly for humbuckers. And I would say that this amp is probably more suited overall to guitarists who use humbucking pickups. I thought that it did good high gain Telecaster stuff, but occasionally I was thinking I wanted a little bit more bite and I was not able to get it in a way that I would personally want to have it. When it came to the Les Paul though, absolutely everything I did with the gain up, the heavier stuff, it sounded absolutely fantastic. It sounded modern, brutal and thick. It's not really for old school metal as much. You heard in some of the loops that you can scoop the mids out and it does go into more kind of old school thrash metal territory, Metallica kinds of sounds, but I feel this is a more modern voiced amplifier in that regard. It is the ENGL distortion voice after all. I mean, there are many other amplifiers that offer brutal metal amounts of distortion and most of them tend to have their own voice. This amp has that authentic ENGL voice and it has that the same way as the full-size heads that cost a lot more than this one. So full marks there. Overall I think the sounds were absolutely fantastic. It's incredibly versatile. The EQ is very, very good. When you twisted the bass, the mid and the treble and the lead presence too, you got what you wanted. It did what it said on the tin. Some EQs, they kind of, when you turn the mid control down, you get more treble and more bass. It does things that you don't really understand, but with this amp you know exactly where you are. You want a bit less mids, you turn down the mids, you got it exactly how you want to have it. Now when it comes to the IRs and the sound, I thought that the 3 IRs that come with the amplifier, the 3 ENGL built-in IRs, are absolutely fine. As I said in the introduction, I used number 3, which is the XXL ENGL 4x12 for that, and I thought it sounded really good indeed. Just a quick word on the sounds, if you're not using the IRs, if you're using a cabinet, I did do that too and I thought that sounded great. There's a bunch of other videos out there on YouTube by guys like Jamie Humphreys and Henning Pauly who showcase that very well indeed, so I thought I'd leave that to them. But the IRs, that's kind of my game because I wanted to have this one amp going into my Mac and that was it. So that's for the sounds then. Very, very good, very, very versatile, and I can imagine this being used in many different genres, even though if you're a clean guitar player, you're probably going to be kind of having to push yourself to try this one out over other more traditional choices. Alongside the sounds then, there's a bunch of other features that make this amplifier stand out from the crowd. Now 2 of them relate to the sounds very much indeed. That's the delay and the reverb controls. I find the reverb to be a great addition to the amp. I really like amps that have reverb. It just gives you an extra that amps with reverb don't have, because quite often, in fact almost all of the time, I will have just a little bit of room reverb on just to give a little bit of depth to a tone, you know, and I had that on for basically every riff that I showcased for you in this video. When I turned the reverb up in the reverb delay kind of test loop, you could hear that it was a very big sort of a room reverb, almost a hall reverb, and it got to be quite atmospheric. It's nothing you would use for post-rock or anything really ambient, but a very usable reverb nonetheless. So while I rate the reverb very highly, I rate the delay even more highly. It's a really, really good delay sound, and as I think Henning said in his video about this amp, ENGL could really sell this delay in its own 3-button box and people would pay pretty good money for it. To my ears, it sounds a bit like a nice analog delay. It's not too decayed, it's kind of a bucket brigade sort of a sound to me. It's quite clean for an analog delay. I like the repeats, but it just sounds very pleasant indeed, and it's really, really useful for filling out a sound, for making solos sound thicker, to giving you a bit more body for tones, and also, like I did in the loop, for doing more ambient things. There's a great many options with it, and I really like the fact that you can really have it going almost into infinity, almost into self-oscillation with the repeats. It gives you quite a lot of options for a built-in delay control. Obviously it doesn't give you as much as a dedicated pedal would, but it's very, very usable nonetheless. And if you are someone who didn't want to buy your own pedal, if you wanted a head that had everything in it, then the reverb and the delay on the Ironball Special Edition are going to be absolutely your cup of tea. Now my recommendation there would also be get a MIDI foot controller so you can control all this stuff using your foot down on the floor, because the controls are quite fiddly to reach on the back of the amplifier, which I'll get to in a bit later. But the delay and the reverb, very, very good indeed. Now the other features on those knobs on the front also give you good sound sculpting capabilities. So the master volume boost gives you a nice clean push if you need it. The gain boost gives you a bit more gain, and although I didn't use it for most of the riffs that I did, I turned it on in the loops and it gives you a touch more aggression. For my personal style, perhaps a bit too much in some cases, but I can see how it would be absolutely usable in some settings. The noise gate is a very decent one. It cuts off absolutely any unwanted noise you don't want. You can turn it all the way up and it becomes way too sensitive, but you just take a little bit of time to tweak it to how you need it for the kind of music you play. And again, it takes away the need for you to have an extra third-party noise gate pedal down on the floor. So very, very good indeed. Now, all those things can be controlled with MIDI, so I find that a really useful thing. If you're going to be gigging with this amplifier, you're definitely going to want some kind of a foot controller if you're not using just one or two tones. Now that could be a full-on MIDI foot switch like the ENGL Z9 and Z12 for example, or it could be a third-party one, it could be a more simple one, or it could even be an analog simple foot switch to go between the two channels or to activate the gain boost. But check out how you think you would use this amp in your own personal settings and get a switch that for you maximizes the use of this amplifier, because it's really beneficial to have. Now, in terms of the other features, the other big thing is the IR loader and the power soak attenuation. So the power soak attenuation is very cool. I found that when playing this amp at home here with my 1x12 cabinet, the 1 watt setting was way too loud even for home use. So this is a loud amplifier. When you get up to about the full 20 watts, it's going to be loud enough to gig with for someone like me. If you're playing full-on metal, it might not be quite loud enough, but I would imagine in most cases it will be. Not a problem either way though, because of course you can connect it straight to the PA, or you can hook it up to a mixer or whatever, and that's thanks to the IR loader. And I find that to be a very, very useful thing in 2021, because everybody these days wants an amplifier that they can plug into their home recording setup, and that's exactly what you can do with the Ironball Special Edition. As I've said before, the 3 ENGL IRs are very good indeed, and you have options to upload 5 more of your own. So the world's your oyster there pretty much. Very, very cool feature, and it lets you really master your own sound and take it with you wherever you go. You can have exactly the same tone at home as you can on stage for your gig the week after. I think that's a very cool feature indeed, and one that I'm very happy to see here in this amplifier. There are a couple of little things that I want to mention that I don't quite like so much about this amplifier. The first is one that I've already mentioned, and that's the fact that so many of the controls and features are accessible only from the back of the amplifier, unless you have a MIDI foot controller. So if you want to tweak the delay or reverb, for example, you have to reach around to the back of the amp. If you want to change the IR settings, that's on the back of the amp as well. If you want to plug in your headphones, that's on the back of the amp too, etc. Now, that's not a problem at all if you're at home and you've got all the space and time in the world to tweak and do those things exactly the way you want it. But if you are recording in a studio and you've got the amp in an amp rack or something and it's against the wall, you're not going to be able to reach those controls on the back. It would be the same in a gigging situation. And like I said, if you're in that situation, get yourself a MIDI board so you don't need to really be round the back of the amp at all times. You know, if you have a MIDI controller, you can control the tap tempo on the delay, you can control the reverb, you can switch things on and off, you can even change between IR settings and so on. So that's really an advantage there. And you know, the advantage of those features also being on the back of the amplifier is the fact that if you do play gigs, the front of the amp actually looks really nice and clean and simple. So the fact that the features are on the back of the amp is kind of annoying in a way, but it does free up the front of the amp for your gigging joy and delight and ease of use. So in that way, good and bad. Another thing I'd like to change about this amp would be that I would like to have separate EQ sets for the clean and lead channels, and that's because for the clean and the lead I had very different settings on the EQ controls. The most obvious one being that on the clean channel I had a lot less mids, and on the lead channel I had a lot more, and that's something that with this amp you can't save and recall via MIDI. So when you change channels, you'd have to change that mid control by hand to get yourself back into the tonal position that you wanted to be in, unless of course you had an EQ pedal or something like that to otherwise shape or mold your tones. Now, not an option if you're just playing at home and you have all the time in the world, but if you're gigging or doing anything where you require an instantaneous change in tone that way, then that's something that you're going to have to think about. So for me personally, if I was gigging this amp, I would probably need to get an EQ control or some kind of overdrive pedal or a compressor maybe for the clean channel that meant that I could have the mids pretty much at 12 o'clock and it wouldn't be an issue whether I was on the clean or the lead channels. And I can see why there's only one set of controls for both the channels together, because it's not really an issue for everybody. This is just a personal thing for me, and it also keeps the front panel of the amp less packed, and of course it keeps the price of the amp down a little bit as well, but it's something I personally would like to change. Another little thing I want to bring up that frustrated me at first was the fact that I wasn't really able to balance the overall output level of the two channels that well. Now, this is probably only going to be an issue for the minority of people, including me, so I thought I'd bring it up anyway. I was using the IR loader on the amp. I was going straight into my audio interface, so I was using the IRs, and I also had the power amp section of the amplifier active, so I was able to use the master volume control. I also had the lead volume control, and I was then tweaking the clean volume by using the gain control for that channel. And when going between the clean gain control, the lead gain, the lead volume, and the master volume control, I found that my volumes were going up and down all the time. It was quite difficult at first for me to get it at a consistent sort of a level. So that's something I got better at it, and it's something you do improve with over time, but that's something I would like to see being made more easy to operate in future. And the final downside of the amp for me is the headphone out. Now, it's wonderful that the amp has one. It's really useful. You can just have the head on its own and practice with it anywhere silently, so you don't annoy your neighbors or anything like that. But one thing I found, that when I was using the headphone out, it sounds completely different to what you're hearing when you record into your DAW. So I was taking my sound and recording it into Logic Pro on my Mac, and what I was hearing in my headphones was only distantly related to what I was hearing in the final settings in Logic Pro and what you guys are hearing in the video. No problem with that, because actually Logic Pro, the sounds always were much better than the sounds I was hearing in the headphones. But it means that if you're trying to dial in tones, what you're hearing in the headphones is perhaps not 100% accurate. And I would recommend that if you're going to be going straight into a computer, get decent studio monitors, because they will give you a much better and more realistic feedback on the tones that you're going to be hearing. So if you're considering buying the Ironball Special Edition, what's the competition? What are the other amps out there that really give you this feature set and these tonal qualities? Well, to my mind, there's not that much direct competition. Now, the first thing that came to mind when thinking about what's similar to the Ironball would be the D20 and the G20 from Rev. Those are both lunchbox amps. They have a built-in 2-notes torpedo technology, so if you love your cab sims and your IRs, you've got more options with those little Rev amps, but they have much less in terms of tonal variety and in terms of metal and clean options than the ENGL has. There are also amps from Hughes and Kettner, which I would say are pretty close in some respects. Now you have the Black Spirit 200, which is a slightly more affordable solid state technology kind of a version, and you have the Grandmeister Deluxe 40, which is the tube version of that. Those amps both have 4 channels, they have a lot more features, they have different built-in effects, and they have Hughes and Kettner's red box technology instead of IRs. So they offer something a little bit different. They also light up blue instead of red, so if you're into that kind of thing, that could be worth looking at. Now, Hughes and Kettner, for me personally, they have a more varied clean channel, and you can get more variety out of their clean channels. I really love the Black Spirit 200's clean channel. I use the Black Spirit 200 for a lot of the videos I shoot here on my channel, and that clean is just a channel I can sit on all day. It does classic stuff, it does more modern cleans, it's quite a hi-fi sound, but it has a little bit more character than the clean on the Ironball Special Edition. However, I would say that in terms of higher gain stuff, the ENGL really beats the Black Spirit 200 tech. The Black Spirit 200's Ultra channel for me is not something I really use. The lead channel's good, but in terms of higher gain sounds, I get a lot more joy out of the Ironball Special Edition. And in terms of other amplifiers then, in terms of tube amps, we don't have that much. Modern tube amp builders are starting to put in XLR outs, so you can connect the amp to your computer, and we're starting to see amps by guys like Fender, Marshall and Orange give you those capabilities, but none of them are really kind of built as being the ultimate home recording, one box fits all amp setup. And I think you have to go into modeling technology to find more solutions for things like that. So think about the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, think about the Line 6 Helix, think about options by guys like Headrush, things like that. There's digital modeling options in many different price brackets with loads more features than all of the true amp heads, but those are not true amp heads, and in terms of pure tonality, you're probably going to win out with the ENGL every time. But I would say work out what you think you need from an amplifier or a modeling solution. Do you want to gig with it? Do you want to play it at home? Do you want to play it with headphones? Do you want a million different options with built-in effects? Or do you just want to be able to play songs and write music and record it straight into your computer? Work that out for yourself, and then you'll be able to buy yourself the best possible solution for you then. And I suppose that leads me quite nicely into the conclusion of this video. So at the start I posed 3 different questions. Now the first was, does the ENGL Ironball Special Edition prove that ENGL is more than just a metal amp? In a way it kind of does, because I'm a non-metal player and I really, really enjoy it. I got lots of nice clean tones, lots of lower gain tones. I particularly loved the indie tones, by the way. I'm a big fan of indie, just in case you didn't know. And it does the high gain tones very well as well. Of course, it really excels at metal and it's really at home there as well. But I feel like this is an amp that goes beyond metal, and I feel like it's a bit unfair for everyone just to assume that ENGL is a metal amp. They do some amps that are not just about metal, but mostly that's what people know them for. Now, the second question that I asked was, are all the extra features in this amp just gimmicky, or are they genuinely useful? And for me personally, I used quite a lot of the features on this amplifier. Now, there's a lot more that you can use if you wish to, and I feel like they're all there for a useful reason. I don't think anything's in there that no one's ever going to use. I think things like the delay and the reverb are absolutely fantastic, and the IR loader as well. It's just super practical for a player like me. Now, of course, there will be players out there who don't need to use that kind of stuff, and yeah, that's absolutely fine. Just don't use it. And in fact, ENGL themselves sell a version of the Ironball which is not the special edition. It costs about 500 euros less, and it doesn't have all the extra built-in stuff. So that would be your perfect solution if you want that. But for me personally, I feel like all these features have been kind of well thought out, well looked at, and well designed with the modern market in mind, because I think the modern day player, they don't actually care that much about what the technology is. If it's a tube amp, or if it's a solid state amp, or if it's a modeling solution, if it sounds good and if it does what we want it to do, then it is good. And that's exactly what this amplifier is. And the third question that I asked was, is the Ironball Special Edition the ultimate home recording amplifier for the modern guitarist? And I think in some ways it could be. I think there are other amplifiers out there that can do a similar sort of job. But if you're looking for an amp to do absolutely everything, to record with at home, to play with quietly at night when your neighbours are asleep, to do rehearsals with, or to do gigs with as well, you can do absolutely everything with this amplifier. And in terms of recording, it does give you many, many options. You can go straight into your computer or your audio interface. You have all the options with IRs, and you have two great tube sounding channels as well. You've got the built-in effects, you probably won't need them, but they're there if you do, and that's the same with the rest of those features. So what more can I say really? I think for this price, for 1,200 euros or whatever it is in your local currency, you're getting very good value for money with this amplifier. I'm really, really happy with it. I will be playing more metal with it, but I will be playing more standard rich stuff with it too. I think I'm going to keep it. I think it's going to stay in the collection. It's going to become my go-to high gain amp, I think, for a lot of stuff in the near future. Do you have any more questions about the Ironball Special Edition? Let me know if there's anything you want to know, or if there's anything else you'd like me to make a video on, and I will, because I do want to explore this amp and really get to know the ins and outs of it as much as I can. Stick around with the Rich Words Music channel. If you've not subscribed yet, please drop me one. I've got lots more cool videos like this. I do stuff with guitars, I do stuff with pedals, I do stuff with other amps, and I talk to lots of cool people from the music industry. There's a nice video there for you to watch, and a nice video for you to watch there as well. But that's been it for today's one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.